Hello and welcome to episode 435 of Retro Encounter, RPG Fans Weekly Podcast of Many Topics. I'm Mike Sollosi. And listeners, I haven't really settled on a name for this. I don't know if we're calling it Indie Month 4, or September of Adventure, or Short Game September, or what have you, but we're doing 3 sort of short narrative-driven games for Retro Encounter in the month of September 2024, and this week it is The Case of the Golden Idol, a 2022 modern adventuring classic that looks decidedly retro in presentation. But who played that game alongside me for this podcast? They are Jonathan Logan.
Hello, everyone.
And Aleks Franiczek.
Hello.
Alex and Jono, this game did make a medium splash 2 years ago when it came out, and basically the vibe was like, this is a really, really fun mystery puzzle game. It's clearly inspired by classic adventure games while not necessarily looking exactly like one, because it's like it's sometimes very stylized like one, sometimes the features are very exaggerated, but the inspiration is very, very clear, but it does its own thing in how it arranges its mysteries and puzzles and navigation. So I don't think anyone would disagree that this is inspired by adventure games of old while not being exactly like any one specific one. But Jono, you're the LucasArts scholar among the three of us. And this is my first time playing the game, but you mentioned before recording that you played this game closer to when it came out. Like, what do you think of Case of the Golden Idol's presentation and influences?
Well, I wouldn't say closer. I played it about a year after it came out. I'm a very big fan of mystery games.
Still closer to me.
Closer to this, yeah. I'm a very big fan of mystery games. I kind of like how can I put this? The party is over, now you have to figure out what the hell happened sort of mentality. So like Oberdin is considered to be the pinnacle of that style of game. This, I would not say is... The gameplay is not similar to Oberdin. However, the logical deductions you have to make, that kind of way of thinking, is somewhat similar to Oberdin. It's very different from, obviously, LucasArts adventure games they're mostly point-and-click adventure games. Your character's on the screen, you move them around, you pick up items. Whereas this is a game of deductions. And also, I would say that there is nothing that looks like this game. This game is intentionally ugly. Like, in a way that it's so ugly that it starts looking good again. I heard about it for years, really wanted to... Well, not years, a year, and really wanted to play it. And I ended up playing it as sort of a co-op game. Amanda and I put it on the TV. Amanda and I sat down on the couch, and we played it together, figuring out all the puzzles together. And it was a fabulous co-op game experience. And then about 2 months ago, I'd say, we finally sat down together and we played the DLC for it in the exact same fashion. So this is a great game to play by yourself. This is a fantastic game to play with a friend or your significant other. And overall, just an incredible experience. It tells a really interesting story, and it does it in a graphical presentation that will make you throw up in your mouth slightly, because it is very intentionally ugly in places, but that's for the effect. I don't think there's anything like this game out there.
Yeah, I tried to rope my partner into playing this because I figured she'd be into the kind of mystery deduction type gameplay that it offered, but ultimately the art style was too much of a turnoff for her that I couldn't get her into it.
Yeah, there's sometimes a real grotesqueness to the faces in this game. I don't want to say it's necessarily going for that, but it just has like a pixelated art style with very large character models or character artwork and exaggerated faces that sometimes look a little bit gross. Like if they zoom in on someone's face in something like Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life, it's like, oh, there's maybe just too many like skin textures and hairs here.
And then you have like all of the designs of the Brotherhood of Masks, like all of the mask designs are just grotesque and it's made more grotesque because of the pixelated presentation. And it just works so well.
Yeah, the best way I could describe it is like a mix of like Pentiment with like the historical like kind of like pre-Renaissance accuracy of that, and like Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, Beavis and Butthead. There's very tall faces and hair in Beavis and Butthead. a show where everyone is either profoundly stupid or going crazy, except for Daria, who's kind of smirking at everyone in the show.
Yep.
Whatever. Mike Judge is a genius, but Mike Judge has no influence at all that I know of into Case of the Golden Idol. And we've been dancing around the kind of game it is, and how it looks, without really explaining much. And this game is set in the 1800s in a fictional country called Albion, which but is also related to a fictional country of Lemuria. And the prologue case, there's a man at the bottom of a cliff, and another man sort of standing over it in triumph slash fatigue. And at first, I was wondering, like really at the beginning of the game, if you were some kind of third party detective character that had to solve all these cases. But it was clear early on you were not. That you're sort of like an omniscient or limited omniscient third person observer to every case in the game,
Mm.
which is a static scene. But you have the ability to examine any location or almost any location and any character and see what it looks like, if there's any clues there. And if you go onto a character, you can see every item in their possession and maybe one line of dialogue that they're saying or one thing that they're thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And by examining people's possessions and evidence lying around and various scenes of the crime, because there's always a crime somewhere involved in the static scene that you can visualize.
More often than not, murder.
Yeah, usually murder. I think maybe it's an accident once, or a setup once, because there's one where the guy just falls off his horse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and basically, there's the sort of explore view where you navigate all these. Sometimes there's multiple rooms or multiple settings to arrow around in. And then there's the thinking phase, which is kind of just a menu of sort of where you enter in your solution, and it's segmented into multiple parts. And usually it's a, like, here is a portrait of every character in these scenes. You have to identify their full names, and here is a sort of an incomplete Mad Lib style empty paragraph where you have to summarize the events with the nouns, names, verbs, and locations that you have that you found in the explore phase. And those four things have different color little boxes when you can select them from the menu, so you don't get too hung up on whether you have to use a title versus a name or something. But it's basically like filling in the solutions of like a grid-based logic puzzle, from the clues that you infer from all the evidence and some dialogue and some just observance of reality here. And sometimes you can use context not in the immediate scene. Like if you recognize a character that was in an earlier case, maybe you can just find their names in the evidence and put it in right away. Like I remember that being the case for Alistair Koch and James Turner, who are in a couple cases in a row. And it's like, I recognize these two Jokers from the previous case. I can just put in their names right away.
Whenever you see Peter Batley, you're just like, I know who that guy is.
It's like, that's unmistakably old Pete. But but I actually didn't. I feel silly. On at least two cases when people use aliases, I didn't recognize them right away. And you sort of fill these in. Like entries into a logic grid, like words in a Mad Lib. They remind me of, I don't know if you've played the Danganronpa games, but in the three sort of main series Danganronpa games, the sort of climax of every case is a manga style recreation of the crime, and you have to enter in names and actions and panels of the manga style recreation in the proper order as sort of like the final, this is how it happened. And they're extremely dramatic and stylized in Danganronpa, and it's not quite like that here, but it's the same similar solution entry. But it really is like you're getting one of those. It's like a solve your own murder mystery kind of book in video game form, kind of like a 90s adventure game, and it's really fun and satisfying. Like I think like the escalation of the cases get more complex as they go on. Some are better than others, naturally, and the story drip that they feed you sort of builds intrigue until some truly wild situations are sort of made evident. I mean, we're avoiding spoilers here because I want to save the spoiler discussion for the second half of this episode in case some people, some listeners are going in cold, and maybe they want to play the game for themselves, which I recommend. And I know some people care about spoilers and some people don't, but yeah, I had an absolute blast with this game. Both of you mentioned either playing it with your partner or trying to get your partner into it. I
Mhm.
talked about, I played the first 2 or 3 cases and talked to my girlfriend about it, and said, "Hey, I think you'd really like this. Do you want to play the rest of them with me?" And she said, "Sure, I'd love to." But then I think she got busy the second night I was going to play, and then the third night, I just got too excited and beat the entire rest of the game on my third sitting. So I will encourage her to play it at a later date, but regrettably, circumstances and my own enthusiasm prevented us from playing it together because the
Mhm.
game is just that fun and interesting.
It's so absorbing.
Yeah. It really is like you're reading a murder mystery novel that's really good and you don't want to put it down and you want to see how it ends. That's exactly what happened to me.
I kind of feel it's interesting when you said a few minutes ago about the who the quote unquote playable character is, you, and how you're like this kind of viewer from above. The way I kind of looked at it based on the thinking panel, I always kind of felt like you are a historian who is trying to piece together what happened in history like 100 years later based on clues from the past. And obviously in this game you have much more than a historian would have because you can actually see the scene and like look at their possessions and things like that. But the whole like I feel like you're almost filling in historical documents and like come with the story, the Mad Lib section, and like the little pieces of information. It's interesting how these kind of games can be absorbed by the player. But this one, I think anyone who plays it, everyone's going to get the same experience, but everyone's going to feel slightly different about it as they play.
Yeah, I like the historian comparison. But like there's an added like additional layer to it where it's like you are going through like this specific like chronology of like how
Mm.
these different like events happened, but at the same time you're constantly like rewriting your understanding of like everything that's
Hmm.
been going on, and like you'll like fill out that like the fact document of like one individual case, and then like maybe you notice details in that case that aren't in the fact document, and then they become kind of like more relevant later on. So it's like this constant like writing, thinking you understand, and then rewriting as like your understanding of these characters, like their allegiances, the groups they become part
Hmm.
of, all become more fleshed out as like more and more bits of the history become like apparent in your head.
Yeah.
Really cool experience.
This game also has one of my favorite narrative conceits, which is a historical drama is so like, well, it's locked in by what actually happened in history. But I really love video games when they create essentially a pastiche of a country. Like Albion is very clearly England. It's just what it is. It's England, but like there's no historical figures in this game. It's a little bit like Dunwall in the Dishonored series, where
Mhm.
you're like, oh, I know where this area is. This is clearly England, Dunwall, or this is clearly Spain, but it's a fictionalized version of it, so you can do absolutely anything with the history that you want. And that's kind of what Golden Idol does. It gives you a fictionalized version of a country that you kind of recognize. It feels familiar. There's nothing really otherworldly about Albion, but you don't know what's happening here. Although there are some shades later in the game of Big Brother, just a little bit.
And yeah, and Lemuria is a vaguely new world nation that could be in a fictional Americas or a fictional Far East, that is clearly being exploited and treated as the exotic or the other by the Albionese, and that even comes into play into one of the cases that
Hmm.
threw me off a little bit. And the cases themselves, like sometimes it's sort of pretty clear what happened. Like that the very first case of the game is like you look at the possessions on the campsite, and on each person. Again, one person's dead at the bottom of the cliff and the other person standing on top of the cliff. uh like
Who could the murderer possibly be?
Exactly, but when you read the letters between them, it's like, oh, they agreed that the lord would have 2/3 of the reward and the doctor would have 1/3, and one man's possessions has like one bag of gold and a scalpel, and the other one has 2 bags of gold and a royal seal or something. So it's like, oh, okay, it's the lord that pushed the doctor over and not the other way around, and there are these names because of these names in the letter, and such and such and such. So it's not challenging, but it gives you sort of like a taste of what's to come and the kind of deductions you'll have to make throughout the game. If in skipping ahead a little bit, maybe my favorite case in the whole game, or one of them, is a dinner party where one person has been died from has been killed by poison, and you have to sort of look at everyone in the dinner party, look at the servants in other parts of the house, find out which like where the living quarters of each servant is, because one of them has like instructions for reading a secret code. Oh boy. And you have to figure out like which drink was poisoned by figuring out where the victim was sitting, and what parts and what like foods and drinks were at her place sitting. And it basically, and because like one earlier case was about inheritance, and the person that died in the dinner party case was the person that received the most inheritance. I admit I at first suspected Peter Batley, or maybe even the host, Edmund Cloudsley, because they had been sort of stiffed in the inheritance. What it turns out, what happens is like my expectations were totally subverted. I By reading everything, you sort of and you go into Edmund Cloudsley's study, because it's his house where the dinner party is, and you find a bunch of letters in the trash that are threats, because he's in possession of the golden idol of the game, and it was stolen from another person in an earlier case, and he also has political opponents, because Edmund Cloudsley is a member of the House of Lords and has made some very politically charged speeches that rub some people the wrong way. I'm over explaining, but whatever, we'll get there eventually, I promise.
Mhm.
And you sort of discover that a secret society called the Brotherhood of Masks sent a letter to one of Edmund Cloudsley's servants, including a coded instructions, and you even find a book of code breaking somewhere in the house to sort of to hint at how to solve the code. And by figuring out which servant lives in which living quarters, and which servant room has the instructions for cracking the code, and which servant has a letter that includes sort of the put the substance in the drink kind of instructions. It turns out it's the maid it was the killer, and she poisoned Edmund's tonic water. But you only two place settings have the tonic water there. One of them's half drank, and one of them is untouched. And you know that Edmund has been drinking tonic water recently to settle his stomach. So like all of those details fit together. Plus, there's like 4 or 5 or more other characters in this scene that I haven't mentioned, and just by examining all the evidence and piecing together what happened, you are learning about all these characters and the intrigue surrounding them. And this is one of the earlier encounters of the Brotherhood of Masks. And you also sort of slowly notice that, oh, everyone involved in the Brotherhood of Masks story has a ruby ring in their inventory, and that makes you go back to think to earlier cases. Who had ruby rings when you looked at them before? The Willard Wright, the guy who inherits the golden idol from Edmund Cloudsley's brother, had one, and the corpse in the first chapter had one, and the killer in the prologue chapter had one. This, they foreshadow and hint so well in this game that the more you learn and the more you re-examine, the better it is. Like, do we have any other story related thoughts on, say, the first half of the game?
Yeah, I think that the first couple of cases, especially the first two cases, are really, in many ways, a tutorial of how to play the game. But also, it is a real good look into just. It's a very easy way to get into what actually happened here. Like, you get this obvious scene: who's the killer? Okay, who are these people? And then you get a little bit of history with the figuring out how this man died. They're very simple scenes, but they don't really advance the plot a tremendous amount. And then with the inheritance scene, the story really starts to pick up. And I think you're right. Personally, I think one of the best cases in the game is what is it called specifically? It's called the intoxicating dinner party. Because again, going back to this is a fictionalized England. It's a classic Agatha Christie style upstairs, downstairs murder mystery. Yeah, this is where the game, I think, really takes off and kind of cements itself as the style and what they're going for. I just finished, I was at the cottage with Amanda. I just finished a movie called Godsford Park. Great movie. It's literally the prototype for Downton Abbey. It's the same guy wrote it and created Downton Abbey. It's a prototype, but it is a murder in a country house on the weekend with a bunch of guests and a bunch of servants, and it kind of reminded me very much in style of this sort of thing, because this case has it has resentment from the downstairs staff and the maids, and you have like one of the maids is like reading forbidden literature, and then someone else upstairs has like a guy talk. I think the butler has a guy talking about like the parasites of the upper class, and it's really it draws an incredible picture of this society that feels familiar and fantastical at the exact same time. And yeah, I think you're right. This case is just really good.
Yeah, that case is a definite early standout. But another thing, like I'll just touch on is just like I just loved in these first four cases, like how slowly like kind of the world building started to like become apparent, because like realistically there's no like explicit storytelling linking these things together, these like different like kind of frozen set pieces. So like the way things progress and the way like the mystery like slowly unravels is really like an intoxicating part of like the gameplay process, because in that second case where somebody's died and you have to like piece together like how they died, and you see a ladder, you're like, oh, maybe they fell from the ladder, but then it's just like, oh, there's like a specks of blood kind of leading outside of the door, so like that really wouldn't make sense if they just kind of like fell from the ladder and died. But as you're kind of piecing that together, you also just find this thesis called like spontaneous combustion that this like dead person had written at some point, and then you get to the next case, and like the first thing you'll see is just somebody just completely on fire, and you're like, oh my god, like until that point like there wasn't really any sort of evidence of like the supernatural being like part of the story, but suddenly like somebody's holding this like golden like antiquated like figure, and somebody else is just completely on fire, and like you don't really know how like that happened, what the connection is, what the history of this thing is. And then you get to that dinner party, and it's like you like you explained, Sollosi, you find that note in like Edmund Cloudsley's like garbage from like I forget the exact name, but it's like the name of like one of the cult figures, kind of like their formal name, and you're just like,
I think it was Dark Hand Steward.
that's it,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
And you're like, what the hell is Dark Hand Steward? And so like you piece that name together, like it's registered in your mind when you like flesh out that like the history of that specific case at least, but you still don't really understand it. And then once like the cult stuff starts being more like on screen, you're like, oh, so like this process of like slowly fleshing out your understanding of the world and like what's going on in the different groups in it, like it's such a gradual thing, but it's like it hooks you so well early on. It makes you like feel smart with those first two tutorial cases, and just like both gameplay wise and narratively, it's just so thoughtfully paced. And I was pretty hooked. I beat this game in like 2 days.
I mean, that's the important thing about a mystery game like this is if it doesn't make you feel like a genius when you solve it, it fails.
Yeah, the important thing for whether it's a murder mystery novel or a puzzle in a game, or even just like a puzzle in the New York Times, the point isn't that it's very difficult or very easy. The point is it needs to be constructed impressively enough, but have enough clues to still remain fair, so that when the player or the reader or whatever makes the connection, they feel very smart. So sometimes and you can even extend this to video games, like just even in a game you don't really think of as a puzzle game, like maybe an Uncharted or a Prince of Persia. It's like when you figure out the solution and pull it off, you feel very clever. And in this game, even the earlier cases, which aren't really challenging at all, you like, because the puzzle pieces fit so neatly together, and the foreshadowing is so carefully placed, and you feel like you're understanding the world more with every case. You just feel like you are like you're a detective, and also that you're learning more with every case, and it's a very powerful feeling. It's one of the feelings why I keep playing video games, and do like 5 New York Times puzzles in their app every day. Are we ready to move into the second half of the story now? Because there's so much I want to talk about,
Sure.
whether it's foreshadowing involving apples, or how very stupid I felt at some points versus very smart at other points?
Sure.
Okay, all right. So, listeners, if you want to avoid major spoilers for the case of the Golden Idol, this is where you fast forward to the last 4 minutes of the show, because we're going to be talking about big picture spoilers and late game spoilers for the rest of the episode. So, let's go. One of the cases, I think, just after the dinner party. Well, actually, turn it back a little bit. So Albert Crowdsley in the prologue has the idol, and then the second case is the death of Sebastian Cloudsley, Albert's son. So there's several years in between these first two cases, and then the third case is like the reading of the will and the inheritance of Sebastian Cloudsley, the son, not the guy who stole the idol, and he leaves the idol to someone completely outside the family. This Willard Wright guy, and Willard Wright, I think it's Peter Batley hires two guys to steal the idol off of Willard Wright, and he points the idol at one of them to spontaneously combust him, and that's where sort of the maybe the first taste of supernatural enters the story, like Aleks alluded to earlier, and that sets off this big chain of events. I think Edmund Cloudsley meets David Gorin for the first time in that case, because David Gorin is just a local coachman or something. So he hires David Gorin to follow Willard Wright, and then that's the case at the inn where Willard Wright's killed in his room. And even though there is an escaped convict around, you have to realize, oh, the escaped convict couldn't have broken in because everyone would have recognized him. And the stone is outside, but with the constable instead of inside, so it had to be broken from the inside. And when you look at the record of the card game, it's like, oh, Ash Blair was the one who was absent from the card game at the same time as the murder victim. And it was it took me a disappointingly long time to realize that Ash Blair was David Gorin. They have the same face, just different clothes. I don't know. Maybe I have light prosopagnosia or something. The stakes keep getting higher and higher, and the connections to previous cases are always sort of present. But just the world building is fabulous in this game. And then the case after the dinner party is Edmund Cloudsley experimenting with the idol some more. And he's doing it in the hidden mountain cabin because these people from the Brotherhood of Masks that Willard Wright was a member of, because he has a ruby ring in his inventory, are mad that Edmund stole the idol. So in this mountain cabin, there's a scene where there's an explosion where two men die, and they sort of reveal that these were hired hands that were supposed to kill Edmund and take the idol. But it's very weird after that. And this is the part I'm most embarrassed to admit on this episode. I apologize in advance for this. In the next couple of cases, it's hinted at that Edmund Cloudsley died at that mountain cabin. There's letters from Walter Keane, who's a member of the Brotherhood of Masks, about he after the events with Edmund Cloudsley's death, he met a man named Lazarus Hurst who tended to his injuries, and he wants to induct him into the Brotherhood of Masks. And again, this is a big spoiler, but we already did the spoiler warning. It becomes very clear. Oh, and also the apples. There's two apples in the explosion scene where one is rotting and one is new. And Edmund mentions wanting to study the apples more in his notes in that same case, which is case 5 or 6 out of 11. I'm not sure. Yeah. This is one of the cruxes of the entire game, and it took me like probably one or two cases too late for me to understand it. Edmund Cloudsley has discovered a way to de-age people. The idol's ability is to take material from one thing and insert it into another thing. So it can if you have a bowl of water, you can take the heat from the bowl of water to freeze it, and then transfer the heat to someone else, making them explode. And but you can do that for heat, cold, air, and matter. But if you use a very, very specific combination that Edmund discovers in his studies to remove the years from something and give them to something else. And that discovery allows him to de-age himself and rename himself Lazarus Hearst. And the rest of the game is Lazarus Hearst, the former Edmund Cloudsley, working with his two new associates, David Gorin and Walter Keane, to take over the Brotherhood of Masks, turn the Brotherhood of Masks into a political party, and then take over the government of Albion in this new political party. It is wild. They allow the new Lazarus Hearst to be the savior of the Brotherhood of Masks, the prophesized Griffin Reborn, by sort of goading one of the senior members of the Brotherhood of Masks to challenge his ability to do a miracle, but then have him kill himself in a failed attempt. The first Brotherhood of Masks case, the one where Lazarus is being inducted, you have to figure out who's behind each mask and where the and then which each color robe means. That was a fun sort of mix and match game. The entire build up of this game, and I don't want to talk about the final case or the epilogue yet, but what did you guys think of this intrigue building up? And my great shame of this game is it took me a little too long to realize that Lazarus Hearst was Edmund Cloudsley. A little too long. I think I realized it in oh boy. I think I realized it in the case where they're holding court and it
The Triumph of Order.
Yeah. The merits demerits case is when I realized, oh, this is what's happening here. But I really should have learned it, or I really should have figured that out earlier.
I mean,
I
if
don't
it
think you
makes
have any shame.
yeah, if it makes you feel any better, like it was pretty much the exact same process for me. So I don't think they make it like super super obvious, but it is funny the rotten apple detail, because like when I was doing that case, I saw like zoomed in on the apple sitting next to the rotten apple, and I'm like, well, that seems like an irrelevant point, but of course, it's a mystery game, so the least relevant point actually turns out to be the most relevant to the overarching story. So it's really clever how they like put that in like as a foreshadow, so you technically could piece it together earlier. But yeah, it wasn't until that merit case when it's just like, oh, this guy got punished through like being aged, that whole thing about like, oh, this is mostly about like in aging and de-aging, and how the characters are exploiting that. Yeah, it is really interesting progression.
First time I played it was a while ago, so I'm not entirely certain when I figured it out, but I do remember it was not much later than that. I think you're right. I think it might have been Triumph of Order. It might have been that little Pip was upstairs, and I was like, wait, why would he be? Oh, okay. Just like putting together character relationships, and also the fact that they were de-aging people, and yeah. And then when you see it, you're like, oh, they're clearly like the exact same character. They just one looks younger than the other.
I don't think they explicitly tell you about the de-aging, but in the sort of end of chapter mini cutscene where Lazarus explains to Turner and Koch about what's going on, and they sort of transform the Brotherhood of Masks into the Party of Order. That I think I should have realized it like at that moment, but it took me exploring the next scene to really understand it. But another one of my favorite cases was the another one that really felt like an Agatha Christie book. It's the one where Lazarus Hearst is not present. It's the luncheon at James Turner's house.
Yes, it's the interrupted weekend at the doctor's salon.
That's it. Yeah, the salon murder. I think we can call it that.
Yeah.
The salon one, because there's a bunch of characters in it. I think at least 7 or 8, and it's not clear what everyone's name is. But there's also a visiting detective, and he has a mini dossier on every single person there, and you have to figure out like which characters are lying and which ones would be telling the truth, and how their logic can fit in there. 2 different characters are drugged at different times, and the person who was the companion or accompanying the sleeping person goes and does something off screen, or does something not mentioned in their testimony that you have to sort of figure out. And the thing that messed with me in this one, I kind of figured out the bones of what the case was pretty early. It's there's these 2 political parties, and the leaders of both of them are there, and they poison, or no, they kill him with a boomerang. Yeah, they kill the leader of one party and frame the member of the other party for his murder. and it was Koch and Turner doing the framing. And
And you think politics today are rough.
Yeah, exactly. And I figured out that early enough. But the part that messed me up was the other. There was a part of the Mad Lib, or part of the fill in the blank section that messed me up, because the Lemurian guest there, Patu, notices a stolen Lemurian artifact on in the doctor's salon, and he steals it back, and it's on his possession. And he drugged the younger guy, I forget his name, Gabriel something, I think, and he drugged Gabriel to get time to steal the item back. And I didn't notice that part of the story at all. It threw me off that that was a sort of a B plot to the murder. And I think that was the first time in the game I used a hint to figure out the solution, because I could just not figure out why someone else stole something or what was stolen. But I think he stole the emblem or the seal that had his name on it, and that was the one missing from the set in the salon. And it was in his possession. So whatever. Sometimes this game is very specific with what words you need to put in what place, and that even if it ultimately makes sense, it's not always evident to me at the time. Maybe I'm just a little bit dense, which is definitely true. But again, this game, as the cases get more complicated, the challenge level is never unfair, but does escalate a bit.
I feel like the challenge level in this game is when you start getting more and more locations, and certainly more and more characters. See, this might be my least favorite case in the game. Not because it's bad, but because, like, let me put it this way. When I say my least favorite, I still greatly enjoyed it. But like in this particular case, we got introduced to like quite a few new characters, like the various politicians and stuff like that. There were tons of locations. There were tons of different little subplots going on and things like that. I kind of feel like the best cases in this game usually have a maximum of four locations to explore. At least that's how I feel about it. I feel like when it starts getting more than that, it starts becoming difficult to keep all of the threads together, which I guess is just difficulty. But I find the smaller cases to be more rewarding than the bigger ones.
Yeah, no, I see what both of you are getting at. Like in that one, like I think even when I solved it, like I didn't fully understand what Patu's role in the case was. Like the thing about this game is like, and you could call it like a flaw or just like a kind of like design loophole, is that for any of like the individual fact pages that you can fill out, which are either like the overall like what was the history that happened here versus like kind of like the more case specific ones, like where was everybody in that case we've been talking about, like at the time of the murder. Once you get to two solutions that two errors that you have wrong on that page left, the game notifies you about it. So the thing that happened a couple times in this game,
the three states in the solution pages are or the four of them. You need to fill in more blanks. More than two problems are wrong. Only one or two problems are wrong, or all correct. So when you reach that point where two things are wrong, and figuring out exactly what's missing is often the sort of the moment of struggle in this game.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is that, like, obviously the game doesn't want you to do guesswork. Like, it wants you to like thoroughly understand everything that's happening. But because the game flags that for you, like,
you can
solved a couple
solution.
Yeah, I solved a couple just through guesswork, and like with that case we've been talking about, I didn't fully understand all the facts because I was able to get through it through guesswork alone. So I don't know if like we want to call that the game being like generous in a way that's like, oh, if you don't fully understand anything, you can still solve it, or if it is like kind of like a serious design flaw, just like you didn't actually do everything, the full deduction process. So you're able to just like brute force your way through. Yeah, what did you guys think about that?
I don't mind the idea of brute forcing it when there's a couple things left, or there's like one missing piece that you struggle with. But if you could brute force sort of every case from an early point after assembling all of the words together, I feel like that would be a major design flaw. But because every time I brute force it, which is I don't know, maybe just twice total or something, it was like one last thing that I knew was missing,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just try a lot of different stuff until they fit. And I don't think that's unforgivable. I think that like that's just sort of like someone looking for that last missing puzzle piece. But if it was exploitable like that for every case from front to back, I would feel like this is like the ending would be, or I should say the solutions would be way less satisfying if that were the case. But a tiny amount of brute forcing in a game that's mostly about filling the blanks by to reach an end state, I don't think is that bad.
Yeah, I think I agree.
I think my main problem with this case is structural, actually. The first, chapter 1, is like background and basic introduction to some of these characters. Chapter 2 is the setup of, okay, here's the idol, everybody wants it. Why? Then chapter 3, you get into the Brotherhood of Masks, and the first 2 sections are about the Brotherhood of Masks. And then this case comes along, and all of these new characters are introduced, and like Edmund isn't there. Like it feels, I don't understand the relevance of this case until later. It doesn't feel like this case carries on the theme and the character and the storyline of the chapter. I almost feel like I understand sometimes material has to get cut. I almost feel like this would have been a better case to open chapter 4 with. So it's like, oh, here's the politics of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had like one more case involving the masks to kind of bring that part to a conclusion. Because after the crowning at the lighthouse, we don't really see the masks again, I don't think, do we? Like some of the characters show up, but like that's the end of that.
No, I think they maybe still have their ruby rings in their inventory, but by the start of chapter 4, the Brotherhood of Masks is over and the Party of Order is in power.
I kind of feel like there should have been another case between Lazarus joining the party and Lazarus becoming the leader of the party. And then I feel like Dr. Solon should have been at the beginning of chapter 4, the New Order, so that we see the politics and how that goes through. I just didn't understand the relevance because there was such a shift in both characters, tone, and plot line that it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're doing something else now. But it was still in the chapter where we were talking about the mass. I just thought it was a weird placement for it.
Yeah, I guess the main thing it was trying to do was connecting like your understanding of like this cult, this brotherhood, to like the larger like politics of the game universe, because like the politics definitely like fell to the wayside as you got more into the cult stuff. So this was just trying to bridge those two spheres together. But I agree that it didn't do it in the most like smooth or satisfying way.
I think that's why I had trouble with the case. This case felt disconnected from the previous 2 cases in the chapters, and it was also a much more expansive case than the other 2 in the chapters. So, So, yeah. And again, not a bad case. Good story, interesting characters, and an interesting resolution, but just kind of a standalone. And it's not standalone because it's picked up immediately afterwards in the next section where you're like, oh, okay, so the Party of Order won. Then part of the reason why they won is because of the events here. But yeah, it's kind of weird to me that chapter 4 only technically has 2 chapters. I know the epilogue is in there too, but that I barely count it.
I mean, if it's any consolation, those 2 are barn burners of chapters in terms of the number of plates that you're spinning and the number of deductions you have to make.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to talk about them if you guys are.
Yeah,
sure.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, the penultimate chapter is sort of set 3 years after the Salon murder, where basically the Order Party was able to successfully take over the Albion Parliament, thanks to the intrigue at the Salon. And they have implemented an authoritarian regime led by Lazarus Hearst, who by now it's extremely clear to everyone is a de-aged Edmund Cloudsley. And it's sort of weird. It's like Edmund Cloudsley was circling it back a little bit. Edmund Cloudsley was a gifted politician and like would give speeches at Parliament that were mostly ignored because he was kind of considered an over the hill guy. And there's even a woman named Mary Richards at the dinner party chapter that in her possession she has love letters from Edmund Cloudsley and Peter Batley, but Edmund Cloudsley is like a very formal invitation, and while Peter Batley is like, here's me defeating a picture of me fighting a tiger because I would do that for you.
I love Peter Batley.
Peter Batley is a bit of a fail son, a bit of a screw up, but he at least his intentions are always clear. And I feel like Edmund Cloudsley, like the discovery of this of the idol's ability to de-age people was sort of what he had asked for. Like it's his dreams were coming true, and his political ideals were being established throughout the world, throughout the country, in this horrible authoritarian regime, because of the idol. And it's kind of horrible. In this chapter, I think is it called the Tribunal? There's one person being carted off who looks like a corpse, and then several people in line worried that about what might happen to them. But if you look at the order party officials, which include Lazarus himself and Koch and Turner, who look much younger than they did in the previous two chapters, and some other familiar faces, like they have cards showing merits and demerits points scored, which may not make sense at first. And then and there's also notes, I think on either in a safe or in Lazarus's possession, about people that had many demerits. And you have to sort of figure out, from conversations and from all these point totals and dossiers, that the party has established 4 great ideals, and you are assigned a personal score based on merits and demerits, by high achievement in those 4 ideals, or by transgressing in those 4 ideals. I think they're truth, beauty, diligence, and moderation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they are broken down by some get more points, some count for more points than others.
Yeah, and the one that'll really mess you up is getting a bunch of moderation points, because I think that's ±7.
Yeah.
While truth is just ±1. But anyway, you have to sort of do a little bit of accounting and figure out how much points each merit and demerit are worth based on the people that have concrete scores. And first you have to figure out like which each of the 4 ideals are, and which and what counts as a transgression. Like literature is considered in the truth column and not in the beauty column, while art and fashion are in the beauty column. There's a lot of, maybe there's some brute forcing involved if you're not sure about 1 or 2 last tiles, but you have to figure out what the ideals are and what each category is, and then do some math with the merits and demerits and figure out how much the point value of each one is worth. And then you try to figure out who had the highest negative score among those dossiers, because that person is the person that's being carted away because they had 80 years added to their lifespan because of demerits. And it turns out that person was I think his name is Gabriel Bell, or some similar, because he's he's a young man in his 20s at the Salon murders case, but he is aged to be in his early hundreds, because he cried a bunch at his interrogation, which was like -70, because a moderation or emotional transgression is -7, and he cried 10 times. So just because you cried a lot in a very stressful scenario, you get suddenly aged 80 years and die. And it's completely wild. And also from the notes there, and this matters much later, Walter Keane, who was one of the 2 men that helped Edmund Cloudsley infiltrate the Order of Masks and eventually rise to power, got multiple demerits for I think he lied about the work he was doing, and he like hit on someone's wife or something.
Yeah, so I got it here. It's on the website. He got -21 for flirting with a married woman, 10 for wearing ridiculous headgear at public events, right, and 1 for claiming that he had not betrayed Lazarus during the ritual of ascendance.
Right, and also multiple times in earlier cases where Walter Keane is present, he has pictures of hats in his inventory. So he's just a guy that loves fancy hats. and his love of fancy hats took away literally 10 years off of his lifespan at some tribunal that we don't see. So yeah, Walter Keane is aged something like 20, you said 21 years or
20,
more.
21, 10, 31, 32 years.
Yeah, so yeah, he was aged 32 years and kicked out of the Party of Order because of those transgressions, and that's in a dossier. He's not present in the tribunal case, but that's in a dossier there. So like even just the picture of or drawings of hats in Walter Keane's inventory, like 5 cases earlier, is relevant here. This one of my favorite Agatha Christie books is A Murder is Announced, which is not one of her most famous ones, but there's a sort of a doddering old lady in it, and she's not the killer, but she keeps getting people's names wrong in the book, and that ends up being like the linchpin of the entire solution. That a couple characters are kept being called the wrong name. So like when you notice something so small and that shows up later, it is such a that feeling of realization adds to that feeling of cleverness that a good game rewards. Like if you're in an English class when you're 12 or 13 years old, you're thinking, oh, why is this English teacher making me learn foreshadowing? Who cares about foreshadowing? It turns out foreshadowing is like the best thing in the world when you encounter it in the wild. So that's why they made you learn foreshadowing in middle school English.
Years later, when you realize that, you're like, oh, that was foreshadowing.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Mrs. Wolf and Mrs. Byers, my 7th and 8th grade English teachers, who I did not care for at the time, but now admire somewhat. So, yeah, foreshadowing. There's a lot of it in this game, and it's great.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't care for all the math and accounting, and that was the time maybe I used hints the most heavily in this game.
I think one of the things that I like most about this is it goes to show that Edmund, or Lazarus Hearst, is clearly like a brilliant man in terms of his research and things like that, and very, very smart and very talented politician. But he's kind of an idiot. Like, he gets to power, he uses lies to. I mean, his very identity is a lie to gain power, and lying to people, and then he punishes his. I wouldn't say that Walter Keane is a loyalist, but like he punishes the person who knows his secret, which is just a spectacularly dumb thing to do. And then in the end, I'm jumping slightly ahead to the ending, but like he violates the most important moderation. He violates his most important tenet because he wants a wife and he's in love with Mary Richards. Yeah. As a result of that, that's what kills him in the end. Is he breaks his own most important virtue and ends up getting a cannon shot through the chest.
The events of the final case are something like 3 to 5 years after the dinner party case. At least 3 years, maybe considerably longer, depending on how long it took Edmund Cloudsley / Lazarus Hearst to put all these things in place. And in the intervening time, Mary Richards married Peter Batley. Peter Batley's mother or aunt, I forget which. She dies at the dinner party.
Aunt,
and then Edmund Cloudsley is because he's the son of Sebastian Cloudsley, Edmund Cloudsley's older brother. And Edmund Cloudsley is presumed dead after the explosion in the cabin, and those were the other 2 inheritors, along with Willard Wright, who's also dead, at that inheritance dispute, which is case like 2 of the whole game. So he inherited everyone's fortunes, which gave him enough money to propose to Mary Richards, who possibly sort of liked him all along, because when they're together in the 4th case, she still has the picture of him fighting a tiger from again 3 to 5 years earlier in her inventory. So you're like, oh, like Peter Batley's kind of a screw up, but he married her, and she likes that screw up man that was courting her at the dinner party. But
it's true love.
Yeah, they're in love. But because Edmund Cloudsley, I think he really felt like youth was wasted on the young. So when he was able to de-age himself and obtain youth, he usurped this this ancient society, seized a lot of political power at once. Installed this authoritarian regime based on these ideals and this book of aphorisms and adages that his older brother shared with him at one point. So like it's a real it's I mean it's been going on for 3 years, but it's quite a dystopia that he's sort of forged in this 1984, except it's the 18th century. Maybe we can just call it like 1784. The power's gone to his head, and the world, and he can't see that everything around him is sort of failing, even though he is thriving. So he
Mhm.
abandons Walter Keane, one of the people that helped him rise to power here, and it's Walter Keane's and sort of it's Edmund Cloudsley's ego that makes him think he can go in and just take Mary Richards from his nephew Peter Batley, and his own hubris, thinking that he doesn't need Walter Keane anymore, that leads Walter Keane to killing David Gorin. And basically in the course of one day, oh boy. Edmund Cloudsley makes a grand romantic gesture, and Peter Batley shoots a cannon into him and the other soldiers. The golden idol is destroyed. James Alistair Koch kills James Turner, and they had been friends for decades, over who gets to control the golden idol now. And then Walter Keane, the abandoned henchman of Cloudsley, kills David Gorin, the more loyal henchman of Cloudsley. So it's like everything crumbles around everyone because of these weird weird ego of the weird ego of Edmund Cloudsley. I was able to figure out like a lot of it, or I should say I figured out the second half of it pretty easily. When you see these the corpses, I think David Gorin isn't dead yet, but he's dying, and there's other two there's other corpses around. When you see the murder victims, they're mostly wearing order party helmets, and you can't see who they are. So
Mm.
part of the challenge is figuring out who died when, because you can't clearly see the identity of any corpse. But if you look at who's missing from the scene, like Cloudsley's nowhere to be seen, Turner's nowhere to be seen, and David Gorin is nowhere to be seen. But the guy who looked like an aged Walter Keane and still had the tattoo showing his position within the Brotherhood of Masks on his back, like you can figure out, oh, that's Walter Keane. He was kicked out of the party and aged, and from what he says to Gorin, they were the two that got Edmund Cloudsley into the Brotherhood of Masks, because in their conversation in that scene, it's like, hey, this is just like when we snuck into the Order together, huh, or something.
Yeah.
I was able to figure out that Koch killed Turner and Keane killed Gorin without that much struggle. But it really took a leap of logic for me to realize that, oh, Cloudsley tried to take Mary Richards from from Peter Batley, because I just thought it was unthinkable that scenario would happen. But it turns out that I was underestimating the ego of a despot.
Yeah, the Order Party, it's like the temperance movement by means of Big Brother and the Nazi Party. Like whenever you have armbands on your soldiers, that's usually a bad sign. And the ending, I think my favorite animation in the whole game is the demented Peter Batley firing the cannon directly at Lazarus, who has this look on his face of like supreme competence. And you're just like, oh, this is not going to end good for you, pal.
You mentioned Prohibition. I wonder if Edmund Cloudsley is maybe loosely inspired by Wayne Wheeler, because he sort of seized the temperance movement that was led by Carrie Nation and many others, and he did some truly vile things with the temperance movement. Like he would go to parties of conservatives and blame Irish and Italian immigrants, and he would go to parties of Irish and Italian immigrants and blame alcohol that was being.
He was the guy who used blackmail, right? Like a lot of blackmail.
He did a lot of blackmail and a lot of manipulation to get Prohibition started, and then made a lot of money off of Prohibition, and then died while in office before Prohibition was repealed. So I'm wondering if maybe Lazarus Hearst is a bit of a Wayne Wheeler figure, but Wayne Wheeler never became like president or a cabinet member, I think. But it's yeah, whatever, like political manipulators meeting ignoble ends.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to get tired of that.
No, it's very cathartic when you're like, oh, if you had followed your own dictates, you wouldn't have died, but you didn't, and you were a hypocrite, and because of that, you got a cannon fired at you. That is always a good end. But yeah, no, you're right. The Order Party and Anti-Saloon League, peas in a pod.
Yeah, I really did not think by the early cases I would have I would have seen Peter Batley taking the mantle of one of the heroes of this story, but he really ends up being a hero in the end. He just wanted to live in his dad's old mansion and be with the woman he loves, and he ended up shooting a guy with a cannon to preserve that.
And I bet he won the cannon by gambling, and that's his vice throughout the entire game.
That's
So not only
right,
did
yeah.
Lazarus again died because of moderation, or lack thereof, actually.
Yeah, he even has gambling tickets in his inventory in the last in the last case. But maybe you guys are much more clever than I am. But there's an epilogue chapter after you find this that basically has you put the entire conspiracy and the entire story together in one place. That neatly wraps up everything with a bow. So if there was anything that you were uncertain of over the course of this mystery, that you have an opportunity to figure it out in this epilogue chapter. And it even zooms back, or I should say flashes back to the first time where Edmund Cloudsley has Walter Keane and David Gorin in the room, all three of them together. But and Cloudsley's like, hey, I was able to de-age myself with this idol. We can use this power to for like untold power and fame and fortune. And they sort of all shake on it. And that's that's the first meeting of the key conspirators. And I thought it was I thought it was fun. I was maybe, even after I had solved the final case using the hint system a little bit, it was helpful seeing it all laid out in front of me, and you know, just the multiple light bulbs going on in my head over the last couple cases was hugely satisfying. This game's really good. I don't know if listeners,
Yeah.
if you're gleaning this, we all liked this game, and you should play it if you haven't.
Yeah, one of the coolest things about the epilogue, and I guess this applies to chapter 11 as well. It's just like you get access to like revisit every previous episode, because in chapter 11 already, like there's specific details that are the game kind of like understands that you won't necessarily be able to like visually glean. Like you mentioned that like an aged is it William is in one of the screens of chapter 11, and you can identify him not by his
Is Walter Keane.
Walter
Yeah.
Keane. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not bad with names, and that kind of like got in my way a bit this
Yeah.
game, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So
There are a lot of characters to keep track of.
So if you are bad with the names, listener, don't let that detract you. You'll still be able to get through.
I'm good with names when I'm reading or playing something, but when I try to podcast about something afterwards, I get names wrong all the time. I'm a little bit embarrassed. We've done Dragon Quest and Dragon Age episodes this year, multiples of both, and I think I called one series the other like 20 times over the past few months.
Yeah, it happens. But yeah, you can go back to previous cases. So like I wasn't able to identify Walter Keane by his aged face, but I did see like the patterns, his tattoos on his back that like relate to the order. So going back to like that order episode, I then looked again at like what the different tattoos meant in terms of like what part of the order you are and like what level you are. And then you go back to that screen that has all the order members, and it's just like, oh, so that guy with who's this like part of the clan and this status is Walter Keane. Oh, that's so cool. So there's like a lot of like cross-checking, not only of specific facts within the episode, but cross-checking facts from like the entire game, which is such a great idea. So even in the epilogue, you can like go back and like cross-check things. But I had just like an amazing like revelatory time, just like smoothly clicking through everything and getting things right in this epilogue in a way that's like one of the most satisfying like narrative moments I've had of like any video game, because like just as I was like filling in the blanks, like everything was just like becoming clear in my head, even though I didn't necessarily like think about it all beforehand. But like just the Mad Lib style just like allowed me to like push forward and just like fully understand the big picture. And oh my god, it was amazing. And the other thing I really like about the epilogue is just there's like one other like detail that you can do that is completely irrelevant to the case. It's looking out the window and like seeing like a homeless person essentially like dead, and like in that room with Edmund Cloudsley and his compatriots, they're waxing like very like highly about like virtues and like making the world a better place and everything, and then
but they're refusing to address the suffering right in front of them.
Right in front of them. It's a beautiful piece of irony that like especially like related to like. Oh, go ahead, Jono.
Sorry, I think it's more ironic than you think. If I recall correctly, the person outside is dead because Cloudsley just drained all of his youth.
Oh, is he? Oh,
I didn't even think of that. That's
I didn't
amazing.
make that connection too. Oh, because that's right. The idol can only take something and then inject something. So he had to have taken that youth from somewhere. Oh man,
this game rules.
This game's good, and I mean, you could. There's probably many modern cities where you can make that that comparison. All these ideals spoken in wealth, in spaces of wealth, with suffering right in front of you. And I know this that at least Playstack, which published this game, is based in London. I'm not sure where Color Gray Games is based, but this game has social commentary on top of all these other great things.
Yep, a lot of class stuff going on there. It's I mean, and again, that goes back to the fact that Albion is a fictionalized version of Britain in this time period.
But
that's great because it kind of allows us to connect to this world in a way, because we've watched Gosford Park, like we are aware of these class struggles.
Yeah, Gosford,
so it works really
Gosford Park really is just if Clue was a period piece.
Yes.
I remember, and maybe a little bit less absurd, or maybe something like Murder by Death, but a lot less absurd. That's a crazy ass movie. But
thank God Peter Molyneux invented Albion. What a genius! That's a joke, by the way.
Oh boy, is that a Fable joke? I haven't played enough Peter Molyneux games to understand every meme about them, I'm afraid. But yeah, I mean, we all enjoyed this game, and I think that it's reasonable to assume that all three of us would be interested in playing more games like these. Well, fortunately for everyone, they did release 2 DLC episodes, each of which is sort of like one chapter or 3 cases worth of material, just like Case of the Golden Idol. And I haven't played them, but Jono, you have, and you said that they basically serve as prequel chapters.
Yeah, they serve as prequel chapters to the original game. So it picks up on, I think they're called the Lemurian Vampire and the Spider of Lenka. And it picks up just before the first case of this game. So it kind of tells the story of how the idol got into the hands of Oberon Geller and Albert Cloudsley, and how they stole it from the Lemurian people. And it's the exact same game. There's not really any new mechanics that are introduced, but it's more of the same. But frankly speaking, I'm fine with more of the same. It's great. It looks right. It plays right. I'm very excited to see what they do with the sequel that's coming out hopefully this year or maybe next year.
No, it's allegedly scheduled for October 2024. So that game is coming out in something like 6 weeks. Again, allegedly. I would not be shocked if it received a delay or similar, because that's just a reality of game development. But again, our timing for playing this game was a little bit remarkable, because there's more of it coming very soon. And the playtime for me in this game was maybe right around 5 hours. Some games feel a little bit too long, like they're wearing out their welcome by the time you end it. This one, I didn't feel that at all. I was ready to play more chapters of it after I played the epilogue.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So I mean, I immediately wish listed those DLC chapters. I have a zillion games to play right now, so I'm not going to jump into them right away. But I am very, very interested in them and in the sequel, which is called The Rise of the Golden Idol.
Takes place in the 1970s, so it's going to be, if there's not a Columbo parody.
Peter Falk is in Murder by Death, the movie I referenced 5 minutes ago or so.
To those who don't know, Sollosi really likes Columbo.
I do really like Columbo, it's true. Did you know that there's a statue of Peter Falk in Budapest?
I think I watched something on YouTube about that years ago.
Peter Falk is a Hungarian name, and there is a famous Hungarian statesman and revolutionary leader with the last name Falk, and I forget his actual name. And someone in Hungary believed that Peter Falk was like a descendant of the statesman, So they just made a statue of Columbo in Budapest somewhere. It turns out he's not related to that other Falk. He's just Peter Falk is just like the grandson or something of Hungarian immigrants. But no, there's a random Columbo statue in Budapest because of a mistaken identity with names.
Yeah, who cares? He deserves a statue. I'm fine with having a
I'm
statue.
glad there's a Columbo statue.
No one's
somewhere.
upset about it, but it's sort of funny that it was a mistake. But anyway, all right, if we're talking about Columbo landmarks and 1980s television in Eastern Europe, maybe we're near the end of the episode. Listeners, we all really enjoyed Case of the Golden Idol, and I think it comes heavily recommended. I hope that if you haven't played it, we've made you 1% closer to trying it. And if you have played it, I hope that you enjoyed the discussion that took place, and maybe you learned something, because I did not make that homeless guy connection in the epilogue that you did, John. So that was fun. This game's great, and I've heard by reputation the next game that we're playing is great as well. We did a 2020s adventure game this week, and last week we did a 2010s sort of walking simulator narrative game. And for next week, we're going back to the 1990s for another classic LucasArts game. We did an episode on Secret of Monkey Island, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So now we're going into another game from that canon, Day of the Tentacle. Jono, you've mentioned this to me, that this is one of your favorite games of that kind. It's a sort of a classic of the genre and that time period, but I have not played a single second of it and only know bits and pieces about the plot. So I'm really excited to try it.
I think you're really going to like it. It's considered to be one of LucasArts' best adventure games ever made for a reason. It's really, really funny with some incredibly clever and stupid clever humor, which is I love stupid clever, where it's like, that is so dumb, but it's so well constructed. A lot of that in this game. I think you're really going to like it.
Save it for the podcast, buddy. We're gonna talk about Day of the Tentacle quite a bit next week. Day of the Tentacle had a remaster some years ago, so I've owned that game for at least a few years now. I got it in some PSN sale of days gone by. But so I will be playing that very soon and talking about it with you, Jono, and others also very soon. But we do have most of October planned out as well. We're going to have an episode on Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. That is not the FF14 expansion that just released earlier this year. This is the, I believe, 2021 FF14 expansion. But we have a lot of FF14 fans on the on RPG Fan staff and in our listenership, and we thought it was about time that, Zach sells FF14 Endwalker on me even harder. So that is coming, I believe, next in 2 weeks. And then right after that, we're doing an episode on Vanillaware games. We have covered Vanillaware on the podcast before a little bit. We did 2 episodes on Muramasa the Demon Blade and something like, holy moly, probably 2019, maybe 5 years ago. But Vanillaware has a really impressive catalog with not including but not limited to Odin's Sphere, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, the very recent Unicorn Overlord, and others. So there's definitely enough games and enough RPG goodness in that catalog to celebrate it in the podcast episodes. We're going to have an episode on Vanillaware games coming in 3 weeks. And maybe you heard me mention it before here or on social media. The big game we're playing in October and talking about over the course of 2 episodes is Kingdom Hearts 2, a game that I have been very deliberately avoiding for over 20 years. But now I am being confronted with actually playing it earnestly, and I will probably start that shortly after we finish Day of the Tentacle. So I'm not going to say what my feelings are on it yet, because I have not played it. But yeah, 2 episodes on Kingdom Hearts 2 coming in October. Happy Halloween, everybody.
Woo!
We'll see. There's still time, but we have a few panelists very eager to talk about that game with me in a few weeks.
I'm sure it'll be fine, Sollosi. There's lots of people who like those games, right?
I know there are, and that baffles me every day. But we're
that's how I feel about Saga.
Well, no comment there, but I am going to be commenting a lot on Kingdom Hearts 2 in October, so please look forward to that. But listeners, if you want to reach out to us about Case of the Golden Idol or Day of the Tentacle or Kingdom Hearts 2 or your favorite Columbo episodes or whatever else, you can always email us retro@rpgfan.com or follow RPG Fan on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, always called either RPG Fan or RPG Fancom. And we also have a publicly available Discord. called RPG Fans, and all of those places are great places to react to our content or discuss our content or whatever you want related to the website rpgfan.com. Another great way to support RPG Fan is to visit rpgfan.com/shop, where we have 2 storefronts, one hosted by TeePublic, where you can get apparel and accessories, and another hosted by Hyperplay RPG, where you can buy the RPG Fan Reviews Collection, a 300-page collection of one-page reviews published by RPG Fan over the years. RPG Fan, if you hadn't realized already, is a website that has news, reviews, features, and podcasts releasing every day of the week. So please just read our website in addition to all of those social media locations. But we're not the only podcast at RPG Fan. There's also Random Encounter every 2 weeks about randomness and what games we're playing, and that is usually hosted by you, Jono.
Hillary and I took a look at the book Legends of Localization Undertale, and it's about the efforts to translate Undertale from English into Japanese. And it's this amazing book. It's a great series of books. So we did a random book club episode, and we had a great time doing it.
That's right. We do a book club episode on Random Encounter a couple times a year. So that's very, very timely and a very fascinating episode, I'm sure. I have not listened to it yet, but I will as soon as it hits my podcast feed. But also joining my podcast feed is Rhythm Encounter, every alternating 2 weeks with Random Encounter, which is about RPG music and rhythmness, I guess. But if you would like to review or rate random, retro, or rhythm encounters, you can do so on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, however you listen to podcasts, you can find us there. And we love feedback from listeners, especially if it's of the 5 stars out of 5 variety. But if you want to reach out to us and give us feedback, which always sounds weird when I say it, as individuals and not as a podcast, how can you find each of us on the internet? Let's tell them, starting with you, Aleks.
You can email me at alexfranicek@gmail.com.
Now you, Jono.
You can find me at jlogan@rpgfan.com. I stopped using Mastodon, so there's not going to be anything else there.
Got it. And now you, Sollosi. Sure. You can find me as at Evoker for Dogs on either Blue Sky, Instagram, or RPG Fans Discord. I deleted my old Twitter account, RIP the Real Monsoon. And also RIP the, I don't know, between 10 and hundreds of people that died over the course of Case of the Golden Idol.
Mm-hmm.
For a game that is about, I mean, we love mysteries and true crime as, you know, people living in the 2020s, but does that desensitize us to murder? I don't know. I've murdered so many things in video games. I wonder about my mental state sometimes. Listeners, thank you. Good night and good luck.